Okay, let's kick off with something that might make you pause. What if the person you're trying to help, maybe someone you feel responsible for, is actually helping you way more than you realize?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. And it's especially challenging when we think about therapy, which usually feels so, one-directional.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into an idea that really turns that traditional view on its head.
We're focusing on a pretty radical paper from 1999 by Searles. It's called The Patient as a Therapist to the Therapist.
And we're also bringing in a more recent perspective from Ionas Sapountzis, who revisited Searles' ideas and looked at just how relevant they still are.
Right. Sapountzis really highlights the ongoing implications.
So our mission here is to unpack this, well, frankly, counterintuitive concept. We want to explore how patients, maybe unconsciously, can spark these deep moments of self-realization in their therapists.
And crucially, what that might teach all of us, about our own interactions, our own growth, even those relationships that feel stuck sometimes.
Because the standard picture is clear, right? Patient comes for help, therapist facilitates insight, end of story.
Searles just blows that out. He asks us to think completely differently.
It's definitely an initial shock, especially if you're familiar with how therapy is usually framed. It challenges that fundamental power dynamic.
It really does. It questions who holds the knowledge, who's doing the healing.
Okay, so let's get into Searles' proposition itself. What's the absolute core of his argument? The most surprising part.
Well, the core is Searles' belief that patients often have this unconscious desire, maybe even a need, to experience themselves as a therapist to their own therapist.
Wow. Okay. So not just receiving therapy, but giving it, in a sense.
Exactly. He argued that humans, or at least those on a therapeutic path, have this innate striving for psychotherapy. Not just to get it, but maybe to engage in the process from both sides. Consciously or, more often, unconsciously.
That suggests a much more active and reciprocal role for the patient than we usually picture.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more radical. Searles claimed this dynamic is stronger, not weaker, with patients who are considered more severely ill.
Really? Stronger?
Yes. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "The more ill a patient is, the more does his successful treatment require that he becomes and be implicitly acknowledged as having become a therapist to his officially designated therapist, the analyst."
That's quite a statement. It really turns the idea of neediness on its head.
Completely. It's incredibly iconoclastic, even now. It forces us to rethink who's working on whom in that room.
It sounds so ahead of its time. Was anyone else thinking along similar lines back then, or was Searles totally out there on his own?
Well, while Searles really pushed it, the seeds were there. You had people like Ferenczi talking about mutual therapy way back in the 30s.
Ah, okay.
And Wolstein in the 70s explored shared experience, and more recently, Fiscalini wrote about co-participant psychoanalysis. So the idea of mutuality wasn't totally new, but Searles took it to a really provocative extreme.
Right. And in the last couple of decades, there has been this broader shift in psychoanalysis, hasn't there? Moving from seeing it as a one-person process.
Like a two-person process, yeah. Where the analyst is seen much more as a participant, someone who's in the relationship, not just observing it.
So how does that more modern two-person view connect with Searles's really radical idea? Does it embrace it? Or maybe limit it?
That's a great question. The two-person view definitely acknowledges the analyst's involvement. It understands that the therapist's reactions, even seemingly random thoughts, are part of the dynamic. This is where Ogden's concept of the analytic third comes in.
Okay, the analytic third. Can you break that down for us? What does that actually mean in practice?
Sure. Ogden suggested that the space between patient and therapist creates its own kind of psychic entity, the analytic third. It's like this shared unconscious field. And things that emerge in the therapist's mind, maybe suddenly checking their pulse, like in Ogden's example, or noticing the postage on a package, aren't random. They're seen as analytic objects. Unconscious experiences bubbling up from that shared intersubjective space, often reflecting something about the patient's unconscious.
Got it. So the therapist's internal experience becomes a clue about the patient via this shared third space. But you mentioned a limitation. How does focusing only on that potentially miss something?
Exactly. That's the paradox Sapountzis points out, building on Searles. If the therapist only sees their own reactions, say a feeling of deadness, as something projected by the patient into that third space, they might miss the personal resonance, Searles would ask. Could that feeling of deadness also be connected to the therapist's own core deadness? Could the patient unconsciously be trying to help the therapist experience their own shutdown parts?
Ah, I see. So focusing only on the third can inadvertently block the therapist from seeing their own stuff being triggered, what Searles might call the first.
Precisely. It risks overlooking the therapist's own contribution, their own vulnerability, their own potential for growth through the interaction. The possibility gets easily denied if it's only seen as the patient's conflict.
This makes more sense when we look at Searles' own experiences. He shared some really powerful examples in his paper, didn't he? Cases where patients directly led to his own self-discovery.
Absolutely. They're incredibly revealing. Just Miss V. He describes her behavior as outrageously and persistently obstreperous. Really challenging.
Okay.
But through dealing with her, Searles found himself developing a decisiveness and firmness, even what he called masterful kinds of limit setting, that he admitted he hadn't achieved with anyone else in his life before.
Wow. So her extreme behavior actually helped him grow in a fundamental way.
That's what he realized, yes. It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how challenges from others might push us.
It really does. Any other examples that stand out?
Yes, Mrs. C. She expressed all these intense feelings, erotic, rageful, even murderous. Initially, you'd think, okay, that's transference, maybe related to her abusive father.
Right, projecting the past onto him.
But Searles saw more. He felt she was also unconsciously striving to rejuvenate him, to transform him from what she might have perceived as this aging, impotent, helpless father figure.
So even in that negativity, there was this underlying, almost therapeutic impulse towards him.
That was his interpretation. And then there was Mr. D. Searles felt Mr. D was trying hard to get an enthusiastic response from him, almost on behalf of Mr. D's depressed mother, who Searles felt he was embodying in the room.
Okay.
And this led Searles to a painful realization about himself, his own lifelong characterological inability to express undisguised and unambivalent enthusiasm for others' contributions. He saw his own pattern reflected back.
So putting these together, these weren't just insights about the patient. Searles needed his patients, their unconscious actions, to have these deeply personal breakthroughs about himself.
Absolutely. It highlights this profound potential for mutual transformation. It shows how, as Searles put it, the personal and private often require the presence of the other to be experienced. It's not just projection out, it's revelation within.
This brings us beyond just figuring out who projected what. You mentioned the real value might be Searles' willingness to personalize the whole thing for the therapist.
Exactly. It makes you think about that question Stern raised. Can we ever know the origins of our thoughts and reactions?
Good question.
Searles' perspective suggests maybe the origin isn't the main point. A thought doesn't have to start with us to become ours, to become something we experience and have to deal with. The focus shifts to who experiences what and what one does with what is experienced.
So if the analytic third is that shared, undifferentiated space, you mentioned Searles called his own personal realization the analytic first. Can you clarify that distinction again?
Yeah, think of it this way. The third is the shared soup, the mix of both people's stuff, often unconscious. The first is when the therapist suddenly tastes something specific in that soup and realizes, wait, this flavor, this is mine. This speaks to my experience, my history, my own blind spot.
Ah, okay. It's the personal takeaway from the shared experience.
Precisely. It's the subjective insight that emerges because of the interaction.
And the paradox, again, is that this deep personal insight doesn't cancel out the mutuality.
No, it arises from it. It's like that analogy. Just as the eye cannot see itself in the act of seeing, the self cannot modify itself on its own.
Yeah.
We need that other person, that interaction, to act as the mirror or maybe the catalyst for us to see or change parts of ourselves.
Which leads us perfectly to impasses in therapy. Those moments where everything feels stuck, the therapist feels useless. Searles saw these differently, right? Not just as failures.
Definitely not just failures. He saw them as unavoidable and, crucially, co-created. Both patient and therapist contribute to getting stuck.
Okay, co-created.
And it's precisely in those moments of feeling blocked, feeling that impotence or deadness we talked about, that therapists often bump up against parts of themselves they hadn't seen before. Think about it, both Searles's and Ogden's big insights came when they felt most stuck.
So that feeling of, this isn't working, is actually a sign. Maybe a sign to look inward. It's like when you keep hitting the same bug in your code. Maybe the problem isn't just the code, maybe it's how you're thinking about it.
Exactly. That's the point Searles drives home. Understanding the impasse often requires the therapist to first understand their own personal impasses, their own omissions, the parts of themselves they don't know or haven't integrated.
This is a fantastic lead-in to the case study from Sapountzis, the author who revisited Searles. He talks about working with a depressed adolescent.
Yes, a really compelling case. The patient was gifted, artistic, but very withdrawn, sulking, hiding in the basement, composing songs he never wrote down, resisting everything.
Sounds challenging.
Very. He'd failed previous therapies, seemed passive, fearful, needy, but also really angry and defiant underneath. Interestingly, he seemed keen on interpreting dreams and drawings, even while resisting the therapy itself.
And how did Sapountzis, the therapist, initially feel going into this?
He felt hopeful, competent. He kind of fell into that rescuer role. He was good at interpreting the dreams, the art, but he hit a wall.
A wall? How so?
He realized he didn't actually get the kid's deep helplessness, his self-imposed paralysis. He felt like he was just talking at the emptiness, maybe even, as he put it, trying to deny the fear that this nothingness evoked in both of them. He was basically trying too hard to fill the void.
So he was doing the therapist thing, interpreting, but it wasn't connecting.
Mm-hmm.
What changed? What was the turning point for Sapountzis himself?
The shift came when he consciously stopped. He stopped trying to explain, stopped the linear thinking. He just sort of let himself feel what was going on inside him, allowed his own thoughts and feelings to surface without judgment or immediate interpretation.
And what came up? What was that analytic first moment for him?
This is the kicker. He realized that underneath the irritation and the sympathy he felt, there was something else. Envy.
Envy. Of the withdrawn, depressed patient?
Yes. He envied the patient's ability to just ignore the world, to defy it, to be indifferent to pressure in a way he never allowed himself to be. He saw the patient as being, in a strange way, strong and faithful to himself, while he, the therapist, had always suppressed his own rebellion.
Wow. That's incredibly honest and vulnerable. How did that realization change how he saw the patient?
Totally changed it. The pity and the urge to fix him shifted to respect and sympathy for this lonely rebel. He saw he'd been trying to make the patient a good boy like himself, maybe unconsciously seeking the patient's approval or the approval of his own internal figures. See, the patient's rebellion helped him see his own suppressed rebellion.
So this wasn't just an intellectual insight. It changed him emotionally. How did he bring that back into the therapy room? Did he tell the patient?
He didn't confess his envy directly, but he used the insight to change his approach radically. He confronted the patient, but from this new place of shared, albeit opposite, struggle.
What did he say?
He asked things like, "Aren't you tired of seeing a therapist who treats you like a fragile little boy? Aren't you tired of letting others explain you when you keep stating through your nose that you would rather do that yourself? Aren't you tired of a therapist who is as fearful of failing as you are?"
Whoa, that's incredibly direct. But coming from his own realization, not just as a technique, how did the patient react?
Predictably, silence. He was a brooding teenager, after all.
Right.
But the point wasn't the immediate verbal response. The point was that the therapist was finally present in a different way, authentically. His own self-discovery changed the whole energy, the whole dynamic between them. He wasn't just interpreting at the patient anymore.
It shifted the underlying relationship. So what happened then? Did the patient change?
The therapist changed his behavior too. He stopped trying to fill the silence, stopped infantilizing the patient. When the patient said he was bored, the therapist might point out the coziness of hiding out, emphasizing choice. You have choices, you know. Then silence.
Letting the patient own the space.
Exactly. And slowly, without ever really talking about the shift, the patient started doing things. Formed a band, got a job, started driving lessons, writing music seriously, paying for things, even thinking about moving out. Recorded CDs. Formed a relationship that wasn't just about dependency.
That's amazing. It sounds like the therapist, finding his own suppressed rebel, allowed the patient to step out of his rebellion in a way, to integrate his not me.
That's exactly how Sapountzis frames it. He says, then we finally met, the two opposites, the frightened young rebel and the frightened middle-aged non-rebel, sharing the knot in our opposite experiences of me. That shared knot, discovered through the therapist's personal insight, unlocked something.
This whole discussion really highlights something, though. Even with all the talk of two-person psychology, it feels like the therapist's own personal realizations, the analytic first moments, don't get talked about nearly enough.
It's true. There seems to be a reluctance, maybe, to fully acknowledge how much the therapist is personally impacted and changed by the work. As Sapountzis notes, therapists are rarely encouraged to be surprised by what they learn about themselves. which is odd given how personal the work is.
Yeah, it's a strange professional blind spot.
And a lot of the real work, the real change, happens in that messy, nonlinear space where who's influencing whom gets blurry, where subjective and objective mix. Searles felt a lot of understanding happens internally, wrestling with our own ghosts.
So the takeaway for all of us maybe is that expanding ourselves means facing not just the other person's denied parts, they're not me, but really grappling with our own not me, our own omissions, the things that make us feel stuck or helpless in interactions.
Exactly. Those moments of difficulty, of impasse, of emotional turbulence, they're invitations. Invitations to look for the gaps, the discontinuities in our own stories, our own self-understanding.
By paying attention to what we haven't realized, maybe things we felt but never really knew we felt, that's how we start to see more clearly.
That's the hope. As Sapountzis puts it, we might finally begin to see how blind we have always been, and in the process, begin to see. It's an ongoing journey, really. Discovering ourselves through connecting with others.
What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. We've really unpacked how the people we interact with, maybe especially those we see ourselves as helping, can be profound catalysts for our own growth. It flips the whole script.
It really does. It encourages us to think about those challenging interactions, those moments you feel stuck or frustrated, not just as problems out there, but as potential mirrors reflecting back something about your own unknown parts, your own omissions.
So here's a final thought to take with you. Think about any impasses you feel stuck in right now. Could be in a relationship, at work, even a personal project that's just not moving. What if that feeling of being stuck isn't just frustration? What if it's actually an invitation, maybe even from the situation or the other person, unconsciously for you to look inward and discover something hidden about yourself that's ready to be seen?